just take a short moment of quiet together. Peace, peace. Thank you, Oren. Where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Oren, that was beautiful. Thank you very, very much. Truly beautiful. It's such a unusual experience for me to stand in front of a community of our friends at a moment like this where we are marking Oren turning 60, me turning 80, Commonweal having really started its journey with Full Circle 50 years ago, and now moving into a preparation over the next 3 years for Commonweal's 50th anniversary. And we're very conscious that this next 3 years is launching us into the next 50 years. And I think if today had any single message, it is that Commonweal is moving into the next half century stronger and more coherent and more useful and serviceful in the world than it has ever been. And that it is moving into this future with the full support of all the elders who have been there at the start, and that we feel such a deep joy that Oren and his stewardship council and our board of directors and our staff, our program directors and our staff, have forged a community of service to life that really deserves to continue for the next half century. So marking that moment is an unusual experience. And I want explicitly, before I do anything else, to acknowledge just a couple of people, but above all, my wife and partner of the last 40 years, Cheryl Patton, who is sitting there with our dog Francis, who has been part of Commonweal for 40 of its 40, actually more than 40 of its 47 years. And truly, I cannot express how grateful I am for our love and partnership. And I just want to thank you, Cheryl, for walking with me all these years. Yeah. And I also want to thank my brother Steve Lerner and his wife Sonia, who are here today. Steve was part of Commonweal since its inception. He ran the Research Institute. He did a tremendous body of work in environmental health and justice. We are almost biological twins, separated by 2.5 years. And you know, Steve, I'm just so grateful that we are brothers and we are here together today. And thank you for everything. So, yeah. And finally, I've already thanked Oren, and I just want to speak to the power of the community that Oren has gathered around him with the Stewardship Council and with Catherine Fulton and our board of directors and the entire community of Commonweal staff and volunteers and friends. Commonweal's unusual in the degree to which we depend on our friends for every form of support. Many nonprofits rely mostly on grants, but Commonweal has this core, significant, sometimes almost primary rooting in a community of friends who believe in our work and who are very close to us. So those are my expressions of gratitude. I was asked by Catherine Fulton to speak to the original vision of Commonweal as a center for healing ourselves and healing the earth. How, Catherine asked, has my understanding of that vision changed? This is an unusual talk for me. I get bored if I give the same talk more than twice. But this one is a truly wild talk because it's based on what I call wild cosmological speculation. It's a talk in the domain where I've felt most comfortable all my life, which is on the wild and dangerous frontiers of knowledge. It's a talk about healing in the Anthropocene, which means the man-made period in the history of the earth, which is also the current sixth great spasm of extinctions in the history of the earth. And it's based on 4 wild speculations that I have found true all my life. Since we're talking about healing ourselves and healing the earth, the first is that love is the greatest healer to be found. The second is that kindness is love with its work boots on. The third is that kindness, courage, consciousness, and commitment to service are the most interesting ways to live in troubled times. And the fourth is that while the arc of history is long, it actually does bend toward justice, because justice, as Cornel West reminds us, is what love looks like in the public sphere. So why connect healing ourselves and healing the earth? Why was I given this vision when I looked out at the site and this shaft of light descended on the building and I had this vision of healing ourselves and healing the earth? Okay, that was my vision, but why make that central to Commonweal's work? First, we are living in this sixth great age of extinctions, this bottleneck in evolution, which some call the polycrisis. Second, it's truly hard to be healthy people on a sick planet. Third, we need, if the planet is to recover, to shift from a social and economic system that is destroying the biological basis of life on Earth to a regenerative and life-affirming society and economy. And fourth, and this is absolutely critical, as Einstein remarked, no great problem can be resolved at the level at which it was posed. And therefore, in my wild speculation, the polycrisis must be, the problem of ecology, which is the polycrisis, must be solved at the level of consciousness and cosmology. In other words, and this is where the wild speculation truly sets in, we need a new global consciousness. Therefore, the challenge of the Anthropocene may best be resolved by a new cosmology based on what is called in science the anthropic principle, the scientific observation that the universe appears designed to support life. This suggests what many mystics and those who report near-death experiences, and in fact many people from indigenous communities, tell us, which is that the universe is based on natural laws fundamentally structured around principles of cosmic love. Consider the possibility, which cosmologists believe to be true, that all over the universe, on some planets, life takes root, flourishes for a while, and then destroys itself, while on other planets, life learns to flourish in harmony with the nature of that planet. Consider the fact that living in harmony with nature is the great teaching of many of our indigenous traditions on Earth. And therefore consider that what is being asked of us is not some impossible task of technological invention, but rather a far more natural process of remembrance of our heritage of living in harmony with nature. So then I'd like to back up and make 7 points about healing itself, having started with this cosmological speculation. The first is simply the origin of the word healing is ancient, and it means to make whole, to make holy, and to be of good omen. So the mysterious and even sacred nature of healing has been part of human understanding since the start. The science on healing has transformed over the past half-century. It's added immensely to modern medicine and equally to our understanding of life itself. The science also demonstrates that the social and environmental forces such as inequities and social bonds, inequities on the downside, social bonds on the upside, are among the most powerful determinants of health. And further, the science shows us that a sense of agency, which many people do not have, of being able to make a difference in your life, is a critical dimension of healing. Further, the science demonstrates the immense power of self-care and integrative approaches to health, of family, friends, fitness, food, and faith or focus. Or in another version, eating well, moving more, sleeping well, reducing stress, and finding love and support. But outside all of this, which the science demonstrates, outside the Western scientific, materialist, reductionist paradigm, the indigenous people of the world have always recognized invisible energies for healing. Forces like ki energy in traditional Chinese medicine, or the power of prayer, or the support of energies from nature or from beings beyond the visible stream. In the indigenous communities, this was their direct experience. It wasn't just a belief, it was their direct experience of how the world actually works. I find the reality of the invisible forces for healing understood by indigenous peoples. I find that may relate deeply to the profound shift in our understanding of physics and cosmology that I'll talk more about in a few moments, and that it may indeed show us the way to a new and also ancient consciousness that may help us save life on Earth. We just completed our 220th week-long Commonweal Cancer Help Program. On the first night of the Cancer Help Program, and quite a few alumni are here, I tell participants three things. The first is that healing is fundamentally different from curing. A cure is when a disease process is removed and does not recur. Healing, by contrast, is a movement toward wholeness that can take place both in moving toward recovery, but also as illness progresses, and even further, healing can take place, and I've often witnessed this, in the dying process. Second, there are the common conditions of healing that I just mentioned that help us build personal resilience, the self-care dimensions of this. But the third thing, which I really want to emphasize, is that there are also unique conditions of healing that have nothing to do with diet, stress reduction, exercise, and social support. The great poet William Blake once said that if you would help another person, you must do so in minute particulars or unique particulars. That is my experience in the Cancer Help Program and in life, that when I talk to people about what most needs healing in their lives, it's rarely about diet, exercise, stress reduction, and social support. It's usually about a child that they're troubled about, or a mate or partner that they're concerned about, or a parent, or something that they're concerned about deeply about themselves, something in their life histories, traumas from childhood, abuse, whatever it is. But it's incredibly unique. And therefore, the most powerful healing, which most reduces stress and brings people most into the fullness of life, are these incredibly unique qualities that we have. And so I believe deeply that the unique conditions of healing are even more important than the common pathways to healing, and that is indeed a secret to healing work with ourselves and with others. Now, I want to return to examine the word healing again, since it's so central to our mission of healing ourselves and healing the earth. And here are the problem issues. First, healing doesn't translate well into other language, as we found with our Healing Circles Global project. In German-speaking countries, for example, people believe that healing means you have to be sick in order to heal. And so people in German-speaking countries, and Healing Circles Global is now all over the world, really struggle with what to call it. The word healing doesn't work for them. Second, at the level of mental and emotional and spiritual healing, we often use the term as a synonym for what Carl Jung called individuation, what Parker Palmer calls leading an undivided life, what others call letting your soul speak. So in that sense, we're using healing in a metaphoric sense to refer to a set of developments that don't necessarily have to be called healing, if you follow me. That individuation, that letting the soul speak, that leading an undivided life, we don't need to use the word healing for those. And indeed, the mental, emotional, and spiritual dimension of healing don't have to be called healing. So I think that's a very important point. Yet finding a word comparable to healing that is accessible to both secular and spiritual mindsets, as well as across cultures, is a true challenge. We might have to face the fact that the right word may differ from culture to culture. Whatever the outcome for Oren and the community of whether we continue for the next half century to speak of healing ourselves and healing the earth, whatever the outcome, it seems to me that one truth remains. The word Commonweal itself means the well-being of the whole community, and we take that to mean the community of life on earth. Regardless of whether the word healing survives in our self-description, we are likely to continue to believe that we care about the community of life on earth, that we care about people and we care about the planet. Now, caring, like healing, has a very interesting etymology. You'll remember healing means wholeness or of good omen or holy. Caring, and I didn't know this, comes from an old word meaning grief, because grief evokes caring. But it also seems deeply linked to another like word, namely caritas, which means benevolence or love. And since love is the greatest healer, caring for people and caring for the earth has a certain power and a certain relationship to healing people and healing the earth that we might want to explore. So, moving into Catherine's question to me about how things have changed in the past 50 years and how healing, our metaphor of healing ourselves and healing the earth must respond to where we are today, I want to suggest that there are four dimensions of extraordinary change that relates to how we understanding. The first is that American and global culture has changed over the last 50 years beyond recognition. The second is that American and global consciousness have also changed profoundly. The third is that global ecology, the polycrisis, the condition of nature, has been fundamentally altered. And the fourth is that the standard model of physics and cosmology, which seemed stable and permanent 50 years ago, is slowly but surely falling apart. In short, the period 1972, when I moved to Bolinas from teaching at Yale, to 2023, culture, consciousness, ecology, and cosmology have all undergone extraordinary shifts. And those four shifts underpin a profound shift in our understanding of healing ourselves and healing the earth. I'm not going to dwell on the global polycrisis today, since this is a day of celebration, and Oren rightly says the polycrisis is rarely celebratory material. Briefly, for those not familiar with the term, but most of you know are, we started working on it 10 years ago with Pete Myers and others. And today, everybody's heard of the polycrisis, and it just exploded as a global meme over the last year. But briefly, the polycrisis is the intersection of all the social, environmental, technological, economic, and other forces that are interacting with ever greater velocity, causing unpredictable future shocks of ever greater intensity. This is the polycrisis, the sixth great age of extinctions, the bottleneck in evolution I mentioned at the start. The basic truth about the polycrisis is we can't escape it, but we must learn to navigate it, and understanding it gives us greater skill in navigation. That does not mean the future is hopeless. It's not. But it does mean we have work to do. Now, here's where I become a heretic about the polycrisis among other people who work on the polycrisis. My fundamental belief is it's very important not to insist that people focus on the polycrisis. First of all, most people aren't interested. Secondly, they have more important personal concerns. Third, there's a deep analogy to living with cancer or any other life-threatening illness. Some people respond to a life-threatening illness best with denial, okay? Rachel Naomi Remen says denial gets bad press, but in fact, denial is a very, very useful mechanism when you're not ready to look at something. So denial of the polycrisis is actually a very useful response as long as it lasts. It's a very useful response as long as it lasts. When I go down to the beach and I look at all the young people down there with their surfboards and their babies and everything else, are they thinking about the polycrisis? No, they're not. They're thinking about the surf. They're thinking about their babies. They're thinking about, they know what difficult situation we're in. But a healthy dose of denial is a pretty darn good way to cope with the polycrisis in many, many respects. So we should not push the doom and gloom perspective, even if the science strongly suggests a very rough road ahead. For one thing, we cannot know for a fact that the dire prognosis will come to be. Secondly, there may be transformational new technologies or a transformation of consciousness that fundamentally change the prospects. And third, because the cosmological shift in our understanding of the universe may fundamentally shift consciousness in the direction it needs to go, these are three reasons why pushing doom and gloom does not seem to me to be the best strategy. That said, while the majority, perhaps even the large majority of people, can't or don't want to think about the polycrisis, it surely helps to have a significant minority give it careful attention so that as the polycrisis increasingly transforms our lives with climate change, pandemics, financial crises, political crises, and wars without end, we are giving the best thought we can to help guide the way through. Now I come to what interests me the most these days, as I said at the start, which is speculative cosmology, the intersection of ecology, cosmology, culture, and consciousness, the four major revolutions or evolutions I mentioned earlier. And here's the crux of it, that this is the crux of the whole thing, that just as the Anthropocene is destroying life on Earth, so the possibility of an anthropic principle cosmology suggests the whole universe is designed to support life, and it very likely exists throughout the universe. Many physicists and cosmologists believe we are on the cusp of what Thomas Kuhn calls a scientific revolution of the most fundamental kind. Some scientists believe we may discover that consciousness and not material matter is primary in the cosmos. As one physicist put it, the more we look at the cosmos, the more it appears to be one immense thought. Physicists calculate there are billions of planets suitable to support life. Meteors carry the building blocks of life when they crash onto suitable planets. In fact, the great physicist Fermi formulated what is known as Fermi's paradox, which is, if life is so easy to create in the universe, why haven't we been visited? One answer to that is that most life destroys itself when a planet reaches a certain level of technology. A second is, we may look like a rough neighborhood, so other civilizations are keeping their distance. A third comes from the indigenous traditions, which claim they actually are descended from star people and have been visited by star people for millennia. But the fourth answer, which is why it's called Fermi's paradox, is we don't know. We don't know why we haven't. If life is so easy, we don't know why we haven't been visited. Now, of course, there's various speculation about being visited going on these days, but that's another matter. You know, the fact is we don't know. That's where we are. So the physicist John Wheeler, one of the greatest physicists of the century, conceived of a variant of the anthropic principle, which fascinates me, which is called the participatory anthropic principle. His thesis is that not only does the universe appear designed to support life, but indeed our thoughts, and my friend and colleague Walter Murch adds not only our thoughts, but perhaps the presence of life on Earth, that our thoughts or the participation of life in the universe may help shape the universe. Now, if that's not a mind-blowing thought, just think about it. But Wheeler based that on studies of what happens to light when it goes through a screen before it hits, a place that it's going to be measured. And it turns out that whether the light shows up in these experiments as particles or waves depends on what the researcher is looking for. And so Wheeler developed this study where he waited until the light had decided, with the researcher's help, whether it wanted to be a wave or a particle. And then the researcher went in and looked for the opposite, and it turned back into what he was looking for. Okay? So to Wheeler, that suggested that our thought is a primary participant in how the stuff of the universe actually works. All right? So if the universe that we can see appears perfectly designed to support life, and that drives traditional cosmologists and physicists crazy because it suggests something they don't want to think about, some form of intelligent design, God forbid, right? So if the universe appears directly designed to support life, then they say, that's just got to be random chance. What actually happens is we live in a multiverse. There are billions of universes taking place simultaneously, and we just happen to live in the random one that happens to support life, and that's why we see life wherever we look. Well, okay, that's a possibility, but we have no evidence that there are billions of universes. By contrast, when we look at the existing universe, it appears designed to support life. So how do we explain that? If we don't want to invoke some kind of God in that sense, what is it about the universe that appears directly designed to support life that's going on? And that, to me, is the greatest question of our time, and perhaps the greatest question of all time. So if this speculation of John Wheeler's about a participatory anthropic universe happens to be true, it will help us address many of the most fundamental anomalies in the standard model of physics, and the assumption that we hold that consciousness is just a random byproduct of a universe created by random interactions of atoms with no higher purpose than what we assign to it. Now, these speculations are not just mine. The New York Times on September 2nd had a beautiful piece that said, and I quote, "Physicists and astronomers are starting to get the sense that something may be really wrong. It's not just that some of us believe we may have to rethink the standard model of cosmology. we might have to change the way we think about some of the most basic features of our universe, a conceptual revolution that would have implications far beyond science. The Standard Model holds that normal matter constitutes only 4% of the universe. The rest is invisible stuff. It's either dark matter, 27%, or dark energy, 68%. Now, 4% in research studies is below the 5% normally used in scientific studies as the accepted statistical margin of error. In other words, we know less about the universe, only 4%, than we would, take as a margin of error in research studies. So how can we possibly believe that our standard model of cosmology, our assumptions that we live in a material universe, our assumption that a universe that appears designed to support life, that it's all just a random accident? What is the basis on which we make that assumption? So these folks go on to say, a revolution may end up being the best path to progress. That has certainly been the case with Copernicus, Darwin, and Einstein's theories. All three of those theories ended up having enormous cultural influence, threatening our sense of our special place in the cosmos, challenging our intuitions that were fundamentally different from animals, upending our faith in common sense ideas about the flow of time. Any scientific revolution of the sort kind we're imagining would presumably have comparable reverberations. In other words, if the standard model falls apart, not only will it address the anomalies that have been developing to a very troubling degree, but also, and this is where I get really interested, it may shed light on the numerous experiences that humans have with realities like psi phenomena, like telepathy and remote viewing, near-death experiences, past life experiences, and all what my friend and colleague Cynthia Lee calls, and I've adopted her language, the invisible dimensions of healing and consciousness. These things are very real. These human experiences are very real phenomenologically. We can't account for them with a Western reductionist scientific model. Perhaps the cosmological revolution that physicists, cosmologists, and some of us in healing and elsewhere believe is coming, perhaps that will make space for them. So I end with a question, as I began with a question from Catherine Fulton. What will healing ourselves and healing the earth mean in the coming half-century, uncertain and troubled as it looks? How can we best care for ourselves and the earth in such difficult times? And what can Commonweal do and be as a place and community of healing and caring, kindness, consciousness, courage, and commitment to service in the decades ahead? How can each of us, you and I, whatever our age, find our way to live in these wild, wild times? What should we do with these wild and precious lives? And when the time comes to move into the mystery, how can we make that journey in the way we would most hope to travel? I leave those unanswered questions in your hands, dear friends. Love and prayers, Michael.